that crowded the harbour. That convoy, the First Fleet, took around 1,400 men, women and children 15,000 miles to a continent that no British ship had even visited for 15 years. The plan for Australia was something new in the British Empire. First and foremost, this was to be a prison colony. Although free settlers were to follow, the convicts were to build the new colony and make up the vast majority of its population. And over the next 6 decades, 165,000 people were sent as convicts to Australia. Half of them arrived here, in what was to become one of the Empire's most feared and most infamous places. Van Diemen's Land, the island now known as Tasmania, became to the British Empire what Siberia was to the Russian Empire. And the relics of the convict system are today scattered across modern Tasmania. The roads and the bridges built by convict chain gangs, and the cemeteries in which the criminal class of late Georgian Britain and Ireland were laid to rest. But the most remarkable relics of the convict system are the documents it left behind. The conduct records that reveal the fates of each of the prisoners sent to Tasmania. So this document is a conduct record for a Patrick Fagan who arrives in Van Diemen's Land in July 1826. He's been stealing silver spoons, which is a pretty minor offence. He's 15-year-old child. What happens to him next?
As we can see from the record, Fagan doesn't like the system, so he resists at every turn. He does the sort of things that any ordinary teenager from our perspective would do. The difference, of course, is that every time he gets punished.
And we can see that Patrick gets 25 lashes here, another 25 lashes.
This is a really serious punishment. This took the skin off men's backs.
Patrick's record comes to an end. I mean, they literally sort of draw a line under his case.
A group of convicts, including Patrick Fagan, did manage to escape. Only 2 come back to the settlement. These 2 men, Broughton and Calburn, have murdered Fagan.
So Patrick Fagan is a teenager, and not only does he end up being transported halfway around the world and being whipped, he ends up being murdered by other convicts.
Yes.
There's other records here. This is Janet Morrison, and she arrives 3 years after Patrick in 1829.
She also has a very long convict career. From 1830 right to 1839, there is infraction after infraction. Now, it's important to think about Janet as a woman in a colony where men dominate. That means that household servants are in short supply, and that works to Janet's benefit. So what we see here is Janet being assigned to a master or mistress.
Which is a free settler who wants a domestic servant.
Absolutely. She doesn't like, for whatever reason, the employment, and so she leaves.
So she goes from settler household to household, is in trouble some of the time, and then gets reassigned to another settler if she doesn't like it there.
Absolutely. It's a rather mysterious record because it just ends. She might have died, she might have left the colony, she might have married. We just don't know.
These records show that this system could be absolutely brutal, but there were some convicts who came to Van Diemen's Land and bettered their life.
This is a man called James Thompson. This is a rather short record. We can see here at the end he gets a free pardon in 1839. James Thompson does rather well for himself. He becomes an engineer and surveyor, and today is celebrated in the Australian Dictionary of National Biography as one of the pioneers of the built landscape of what's now Tasmania.
Even though he arrived in 1824 as a convict.
Yes. I think it's important to remember that for many convicts, transportation meant a life cut short, But for those who survived, there were opportunities. And if you could get some good quality terrain to farm, to raise livestock, etc., you really could make a good life for yourself.
The convict system in Tasmania rewarded the hard-working and the fortunate, but it crushed those who refused to submit. And that system left behind a stigma within Australian culture. Through the 19th and into the 20th centuries, many Australians descended from convicts concealed their family histories or were silent about their ancestors. The convict stigma, passed down from generation to generation, continued until the 1960s, when it finally began to break down.
I'm really proud of them. They've overcome so much hard life. They've just been thrown onto ships. They would have gone through horrific storms. They would have gone through the tropical heat. If they survived all of that, they thrived once they got their ticket of leave and they had their freedom.
It was a chance for them to reinvent themselves. With my nan's Irish family, they got sent to Van Diemen's Land, and then they started to want the rest of the family to come out. In the end, they had a whole heap of them migrate to Van Diemen's Land.
One of my convict family came from the Second Fleet. He became a mayor, so you work hard, you do well, you were able to create a life that you would never have back home in England.
But it wasn't right. Exporting your problems to another country where there are Aboriginal people that live there, native people.
The most infamous of the convict colonies was Tasmania, Van Diemen's Land. But in the first decades of the 19th century, another event took place on this island that even at the time was regarded as a stain on the reputation of the British Empire. Because the convicts and their jailers were not alone on Tasmania. For 40,000 years, this island had been home to another people who had stamped their presence onto the landscape.
When the British came to Tasmania and they looked out at landscapes like this in the east of the island, they saw thousands and thousands of acres that they could profitably farm. And what they thought they were looking at was naturally occurring parkland. And so they presumed that the Tasmanian Aborigines had done nothing to this land. They hadn't farmed it, they hadn't enclosed it, and therefore they had no legitimate claim to it. But this land, in fact, isn't parkland and it isn't a wilderness. This is in fact a highly managed, highly artificial landscape because for thousands of years the Tasmanians had built, they created this landscape using fire to control the growth of the trees and the bushes. And what they had created was their hunting grounds, and across those hunting grounds were the pathways they used to travel from one source of seasonal food to another. This landscape was their creation and it was absolutely fundamental to their survival. And yet, all of that was just invisible to the British.
The peoples of Tasmania had a folk memory that stretched back through 300 generations. But the generations we know best are those who were living when the British arrived.
These portraits were painted by an English painter called Thomas Bog, who lived and worked in the Midlands right up until the year 1823, when he was convicted of arranging an illegal abortion and transported for 14 years to Van Diemen's Land.
Thanks to Bog, we have these incredible images of the Aboriginal people of Tasmania, people whose names we know.
This is a portrait of a woman called Lara Tong, who was from Cape Grim. This is Manalagena, who was a leader of his people, and he's painted here with the fire stick that the Tasmanian Aborigines used to burn the vegetation and change the landscape. And this young woman is Truganini. We think she was born around the year 1812, which means she's in her early 20s in this portrait. And this is a woman whose story is critical to understand what happened here on this island to the indigenous people.
There was violence against the Aboriginal peoples from the beginnings of British settlement. But in the 1820s, the population of convicts and settlers enormously increased, and thousands of sheep were imported into Tasmania. The lands best suited to sheep farming were the hunting lands that the Aboriginal peoples had cleared with fire for thousands of years. When they fought back against the loss of their land, the settlers began to call for them to be removed from the island or exterminated. The reality of what was happening in Tasmania in the late 1820s and early 1830s has been uncovered in official documents by the historian Nick Brodie. The documents show that settlers, convicts and the police were being sent out to clear Aboriginal people from the region of white settlement. The colonial authorities were not only aware of what was happening, they were rewarding it.
This is a letter from one of the major settlers of the northern settled districts, John Batman. He becomes quite famous as the founder of Melbourne, but at this time he's just a settler trying to make a name for himself. He's leading expeditions against Aboriginal people in his area.
And this is September 1829.
Yeah, 1829. It's a description of a letter to the local police magistrate explaining the latest expedition. They track down some Aboriginal people, they attack the camp. You can just see words like buckshot stick out as they attack. Describing what they take, a great number of spears, waddies, blankets, etc., etc. And then over here, he talks about the return journey. He's taking with him 2 men, a woman and child, but found it impossible that the 2 men could walk. And after trying them by every means in my power for some time, I found I could not get them on. So in other words, they can't keep up. They're injured, they've been hurt in the attack. I was obliged, therefore, to shoot them. So he's effectively just executed prisoners in the field who are wounded and can't keep up with the journey home.
Writes this in an official correspondence. So he's open about this.
Yeah, this is quite open. It's to the local police magistrate, who then forwards it to the colonial secretary. So it makes its way all the way to the highest level of government in Hobart.
And is there comeback when the colonial secretary reads this?
Not really, no. The colonial secretary notices. He says shoots wounded natives because they could not keep up. He makes a little bit of an inquiry about what's going on, but at no point is anybody punished. Batman's not reprimanded, Batman's not stopped from going on further expeditions. In fact, by the time that limited inquiry is finished, he's already continued his course of campaigning up in that part of Tasmania.
But the fact that he even admits to it in official correspondence means he must have presumed that there would not be any consequences.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't expect any comeback whatsoever.
Because he doesn't need to admit to this.
No, he could have just, as so many of them do, just leave a silent gap where they describe the number of people killed. He could have simply talked about only capturing the woman and the child. So the fact that he mentions it means he's feeling quite brazen about it. It's just part of the cause of the war at this time.
Because what that makes you think is that this is normalised. This is just one incident, one event. And that it is now so normal to kill Aboriginals that no one is expecting comeback or consequences or retribution for doing so, and so you can be relatively open about it.
Yep, that's exactly what's happening. I was obliged, therefore, to
shoot them.
As if it was almost their fault.
Obliged.
As well as sending out parties to capture and kill Aboriginal people, the governor also dispatched a mission. George Augustus Robinson. Robinson and a group of Aboriginal people that included Truganini set out on a series of expeditions to persuade the last survivors to abandon their homelands and come with them to what they were promised would be a place of sanctuary. That supposed sanctuary was Flinders Island, off the northern coast of Tasmania. And between 1830 and 1832, 220 Aboriginal people were brought here. Others were transported later. George Augustus Robinson came with them and was given the title Protector of Aborigines, and he was well paid for his work. Convicts were sent to build a new settlement for the Aboriginal people at a place called Wyballina. The remains of that settlement are still here, 200 years later.
In the 1840s, an artist walked up this hill and painted this landscape of the settlement that had been built down there in the valley. It's almost 2 centuries since the settlement was built, and the only building to have survived all of those years is the chapel. This painting shows us what the whole settlement must have looked like. But the most bizarre feature of Wyballina is that behind the chapel was built a row of British-style terraced houses. It looks like something from industrial Manchester or Newcastle, transplanted here, with all of the houses and all of the people squashed together in the middle of all of this space in this huge broad valley, 14,000 miles away from Britain. And that terrace was built for the same reason that that chapel was built, because this place, it's been called lots of things. It's been called a gulag, a prison, even a concentration camp. I think it's best understood as a type of reformatory. This was a place that was designed, built and ran in order to try to transform an ancient people who were hunter-gatherers, a people with their own complicated culture and spirituality, to transform them into sedentary, Christianized, obedient peasants.
A people who had been promised sanctuary from a terrible war were instead subjected to the systematic destruction of their culture. But Flinders Island also destroyed their health. They began to die of pneumonia and influenza at a terrifying rate, just along from the chapel where they were to be converted to Christianity. George Augustus Robinson marked out their cemetery. In his notebook, he listed the names one by one of those who died.